If someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd be sitting here, writing this story, I would have laughed in their face. Back then, I had what I thought was a solid life, a stable marriage, a good job, a comfortable home. I wasn't the guy who worried about his wife straying, or about my life unraveling overnight. But life has a twisted way of humbling you, of pulling the rug out from under your feet just when you start to believe you're standing on solid ground. Rachel, my wife, was my best friend. Or at least, that's what I used to think. We had spent over a decade together, growing, struggling, building what I assumed was a partnership that could survive anything. We met in college, fell in love fast, and got married before either of us had time to really question what we wanted out of life. Maybe that was the first mistake, assuming that love alone was enough. For the longest time, I didn't notice the signs. Maybe I didn't want to see them. Maybe it was easier to pretend that everything was fine than to admit that something had shifted. The late nights, the distant glances, the sudden need for independence, it all built up slowly, like a storm gathering on the horizon. And then, one night, she sat me down at our kitchen table and dropped the bombshell. "I need space," she said, her voice eerily calm, as if she were telling me we were out of milk. I stared at her, trying to make sense of the words, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. "Space," I repeated. "What does that mean?" She sighed, brushing her hair back, looking at me like I was a child struggling to understand basic math. "I feel trapped, like I haven't really lived. I want to explore myself, my freedom, my options." I felt the breath leave my lungs. Options? That was a word I never expected to hear from my wife. Options meant choices. Choices meant she was considering something or someone else. I should have been angry. I should have fought back, demanded answers, begged her to stay, or screamed at her for even thinking this way after all we built together. But I just sat there, numb, staring at the woman I thought I knew, realizing that maybe, just maybe, she had been a stranger all along. That night, she packed a bag. She didn't cry. She didn't hesitate. She kissed my cheek like we were old friends saying goodbye at an airport, and then she walked out the door, stepping into her brand new life without so much as a second glance. I sat there for hours, staring at the empty space she left behind, wondering how a person could just wake up one day and decide that the life they had wasn't enough. But here's the thing about freedom, it's not always what you think it is. And Rachel? She was about to learn that the hard way. The first night alone was the hardest. I sat on the couch in silence, staring at the blank TV screen, listening to the eerie stillness of a house that had always been filled with life. The absence of Rachel's voice, the faint sound of her laughter echoing in the walls, felt like an open wound. I told myself I was fine, that this was just a phase, that she'd realize her mistake and come back before the end of the week. I left her side of the bed untouched, as if she'd walk through the door any minute, crawl under the covers, and tell me it was all a misunderstanding. But days passed, then weeks. And she didn't come back. I wasn't naive. I knew what space meant. She wasn't just out there rediscovering herself, taking long walks in the park, and meditating on the meaning of life. No, she was with someone. Maybe multiple someones. The thought of it made my stomach turn, but I refused to let it consume me. I focused on work, on keeping busy, on pretending that I wasn't a man whose wife had abandoned him to find herself. And then, the phone calls started. At first, they were casual check-ins. Rachel would call every few days, acting as if we were old friends rather than a married couple living apart. "How's work?" She'd ask, her voice light, as if nothing had changed. "Did you ever fix that leak under the sink?" I played along. I didn't ask where she was staying, who she was with. I told myself it didn't matter. Until one night, when she called sounding different. There was something in her voice, something hesitant. I'm seeing someone," she finally admitted. I clenched my jaw, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. There it was. The truth, finally spoken aloud. "That was fast," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my entire body was screaming. She let out a small laugh, one that sent a cold chill through me. I didn't plan it. It just happened. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Right. Just happened. There was silence on the line, the kind that stretches for too long and makes you realize that the person on the other end isn't really your person anymore. "I just wanted to be honest with you," she finally said. Honest? The word almost made me laugh. Where was this honesty when she had been sneaking around behind my back, when she had been emotionally checking out of our marriage long before she packed her bags? But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, "Thanks for letting me know," and hung up before she could respond. I stared at my phone, my heart pounding, my stomach twisting in knots. I thought that would be the worst of it, that hearing her admit she had moved on would be the final dagger to the heart. I was wrong. Because what happened next? That was when everything changed. I'd like to say I moved on right away. That I woke up the next morning with a clear mind, went for a run, hit the gym, and started a brand new chapter in my life like some self-help book would suggest. But that's not how it works. Not when you've spent over a decade with someone, building a life together. Not when every single thing in your home reminds you of them, from the coffee mugs in the kitchen to the way the closet still smelled like their perfume. Instead, I spiraled. Quietly. I told myself I was fine, but the reality was, I was barely functioning. I went through the motions at work, nodding along to conversations I wasn't really listening to. I came home to an empty house that felt more like a museum of my failed marriage. And worst of all, I kept replaying Rachel's words in my head. I just wanted to be honest with you. As if her newfound honesty erased everything she had already done. As if calling me up to tell me she was with someone else was supposed to be some kind of gift. But the thing about pain is that it has a way of pushing you to a breaking point. And for me, that moment came one Friday night when I found myself sitting in the dark, scrolling through old photos of us on my phone. Every image told a story. Our honeymoon in Hawaii, our first Christmas together, lazy Sunday mornings where she'd rest her head on my chest and trace circles on my skin. And all I could think was any of it even real? I don't know what possessed me to check her social media that night. Maybe I was looking for answers. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that she was miserable without me. But what I found, it was worse than I could have ever imagined. There she was, Rachel, my wife, the woman who had told me she needed space, posing in a dimly lit rooftop bar, her arms wrapped around another man. He wasn't just some random guy, either. He was younger, flashy, the kind of guy who wore expensive watches and smiled like he had never had a bad day in his life. And Rachel? She looked happy. Not just happy, radiant. Like she was thriving. And that's when it hit me. She hadn't just left me to find herself. She had been preparing for this, lining up her next life, while I was still clinging to the wreckage of our old one. Something in me snapped. I wasn't going to be the pathetic husband waiting around for his wife to realize she had made a mistake. I wasn't going to be the guy everyone pitied. So that night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took control. I deleted every single picture of her from my phone. I packed up her remaining belongings into a box and left them by the door. And then, for the first time since she left, I walked into our bedroom, tore off the sheets she had slept on, and threw them into the trash. It was symbolic. A fresh start. A message to myself that I wasn't going to live in the past anymore. But what I didn't know was that while I was trying to erase her from my life, she was about to walk right back into it, uninvited. And when she did, everything changed. It had been 2 months since Rachel left. 2 months of silence, of empty nights, of me forcing myself to accept the reality that the woman I had once built a life with had discarded me like a chapter in a book she no longer wanted to read. But despite everything, despite the late-night self-reflection and the slow rebuilding of my dignity, nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. It was a Sunday afternoon. I had just returned from the gym, trying to develop a new routine, something to occupy my mind. Sweat still clung to my skin as I stepped into my house, kicking off my sneakers near the door. And that's when I saw her, Rachel, standing in my kitchen like she had never left. For a split second, I thought I was hallucinating. Maybe I had overworked myself at the gym. Maybe this was my mind playing tricks on me. But no. There she was, wearing that old gray sweater of mine she used to steal when she was cold, her blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. I felt my jaw tighten. What the hell are you doing here? She had the audacity to look hurt. I used my key, she said, like that somehow justified breaking into my house. You don't live here anymore, I shot back. She flinched. A small reaction, but I caught it. And for the first time, I noticed something was off. She didn't look like the vibrant, free-spirited woman from those social media pictures. There were dark circles under her eyes, her skin lacked its usual glow, and when she fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, I realized her nails, which she always kept perfectly manicured, were chipped. Can we talk? She asked. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my damp hair. The nerve of this woman. She had walked out on me, told me she needed space, and then paraded her new relationship all over the internet. And now she wanted to talk? I should have said no. Should have told her to get out, that she made her bed and now she had to lie in it. But curiosity got the better of me. Fine, I said. Talk. Rachel hesitated, glancing down like she was trying to collect her thoughts. I made a mistake, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her, waiting. She let out a slow breath. When I left, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I needed freedom, a fresh start, something different. She swallowed, as if the next words were painful to say. But it wasn't what I expected. I folded my arms. That's so? She nodded. It was exciting at first. The newness, the attention. But then, reality hit. The guy I was with, he wasn't who I thought he was. He made promises he didn't keep. And when things got tough, when I needed someone, he wasn't there. I resisted the urge to laugh. So she had left a stable marriage, a loyal husband, for a fantasy? And now that reality had kicked her in the teeth, she thought she could waltz back in. What do you want, Rachel? I asked, my voice steady. Her lip trembled. I miss you. For a moment, I just looked at her. Studied the woman I had once loved. The woman who had shattered me. And for the first time since she left, I realized something. I didn't feel broken anymore. I didn't feel desperate for her validation, for her love. In fact, I felt nothing. She must have seen it in my expression, because panic flashed across her face. I know I hurt you, she said quickly, stepping closer. But I want to fix things. I want to come home. The words should have stirred something in me. But instead, all I felt was a strange, almost surreal sense of relief. You can't, I said simply. Rachel blinked, as if she hadn't expected that response. What? You don't live here anymore? I repeated, this time with finality. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't waver. I wasn't the man she had left behind. I had changed. I had grown. And the life she walked away from? It wasn't waiting for her anymore. She turned, wiping at her face as she walked toward the door. But before she left, she hesitated, looking back at me one last time. I really did love you, she whispered. I held her gaze. I used to love you too. And with that, she walked out. For good this time. But what I didn't know was that Rachel's regret was only just beginning. The moment Rachel walked out that door for the second time, I expected to feel something, sadness, anger, maybe even relief. But instead, all I felt was a strange sense of finality, like closing a book I should have stopped reading a long time ago. She had made her choice, and now, so had I. Life didn't magically get better overnight, but something inside me shifted. I started focusing on myself for the first time in years. I reconnected with old friends, took on more challenges at work, and even picked up a new hobby, hiking. It was something I had always wanted to do, but Rachel never had the patience for it. At first, it felt foreign. I was so used to considering someone else in every decision I made that choosing what to do with my own time felt unnatural. But as the weeks passed, I started to enjoy it. I'd wake up early, drive out to some remote trail, and just walk. No phone calls, no stress, no reminders of the past, just me, fresh air, and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. And then, just when I thought I had finally left Rachel behind, she found a way to pull me back in. It started with messages. At first, they were subtle, harmless, even. Rachel, hey, just checking in. Hope you're doing well. I ignored it. A few days later. Rachel, I saw that you started hiking. You always talked about wanting to do that. That's awesome. Again, I ignored it. Then the calls began. At first, I let them go to voicemail, but after the fourth missed call in a single day, I finally picked up. What do you want, Rachel? I asked, keeping my voice steady. She hesitated. I miss talking to you. I exhaled. We don't need to talk anymore. I know, she said quickly. I know that. I don't know how to explain it. It's like, I thought I was making the right decision. But now, every time I think about my future, I can't picture it without you. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Rachel, you left. You made it clear that you wanted space, freedom. Now you have it. Enjoy it. She was quiet for a moment before she spoke again, her voice softer this time. I was wrong. I could hear the emotion in her voice, the rawness of it. But it didn't move me the way it once would have. I don't know what you want me to say to that, I admitted. She sniffled. I don't know either. I don't want to lose you completely. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. Rachel, you already did. That should have been the end of it. But regret is a funny thing. It doesn't let go easily. Rachel wasn't ready to accept that she had lost me. And soon, she would go to desperate lengths to try and change that. Weeks passed, and Rachel's attempts to reach me didn't stop. If anything, they became more frequent. I had ignored her messages, shut down her calls, and made it crystal clear that I had no interest in revisiting the past. But something about being ignored only seemed to push her further. One evening, I had just gotten back from a long hike, my muscles aching in the best way, my mind clear. I tossed my phone onto the kitchen counter, knowing there would be another message from her, but I wasn't expecting what I saw. It wasn't just a simple "hey" or another nostalgic plea. It was a full paragraph. "Rachel, I need to talk to you. Please. It's important. I know I screwed up. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I need to see you. Just once. Please, if you ever loved me, if you ever cared at all, just give me this one conversation." I exhaled slowly. She was playing the guilt card now. The thing is, I had cared. I had loved her with everything I had. But love doesn't mean you let someone walk all over you. Love doesn't mean you let someone tear you apart and then come running back when they realize the world isn't as exciting without you. I had been strong, but part of me was curious. What could she possibly have to say? Against my better judgment, I responded. "Me. One conversation. That's it." She replied almost instantly. "Rachel, thank you. Tomorrow? 7 p.m.? The coffee shop near our old apartment?" I hesitated, but then I typed back, "Fine." That night, I slept better than I had in months, not because I was excited to see her, but because I felt in control for the first time in a long time. The next evening, I walked into the coffee shop, half expecting to find the Rachel I had once known, the confident, composed woman who had left me without a second thought. But the person sitting at the corner table wasn't her. She looked different. Her hair, once meticulously styled, was now in a messy bun that didn't look intentional. She wasn't wearing makeup, and there were faint dark circles under her eyes. She was nervously stirring her drink, her fingers fidgeting, something she only did when she was truly anxious. I sat down across from her. "All right, talk." She swallowed hard, looking at me like she wasn't sure where to start. Then, she took a deep breath. I made the worst mistake of my life. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You've said that before." She winced. "I mean it, though." She hesitated, biting her lip. "I thought I was doing what was best for me. I thought leaving would make me happy. And at first it did. I felt free. I felt like I had all these opportunities. But then, reality set in." I didn't respond. I let her talk. She exhaled shakily. "The guy I left you for? He was a fantasy. He made everything seem so exciting, so effortless. But it turns out, he wasn't interested in me. He was interested in the idea of me. The second things got difficult, the second I wasn't this perfect, fun version of myself, he lost interest." I raised an eyebrow. "So he dumped you?" Her eyes flickered with pain. "Not exactly. He cheated." For a second, I just stared at her. The irony was almost laughable. She let out a hollow laugh. "Yeah, karma, right?" I didn't feel sorry for her. I wanted to. There was a time when seeing Rachel in pain would have shattered me. But all I felt now was a strange detachment. Like I was listening to a stranger tell me their problems instead of the woman I had once built a life with. She reached across the table, her fingers barely brushing against mine. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to care. But I needed you to know that I regret everything. I regret leaving. I regret hurting you. And I wish more than anything that I could take it all back." I pulled my hand away. "But you can't." Her eyes filled with tears. "I know." I stood up, tossing a few bills onto the table for my coffee. "Take care of yourself, Rachel." She looked up at me, desperation flickering in her gaze. "Is there really no chance? Not even a small one?" I didn't even hesitate. "No." And then I walked away. As I stepped outside, breathing in the cool evening air, I realized something. This wasn't just the end of my relationship with Rachel. This was the beginning of something new. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. I thought that was the last of it. That Rachel's confession at the coffee shop was the final act in this twisted play. I had walked away, left her sitting there with her regrets, and I had moved on. Truly moved on this time. But regret doesn't just disappear. And Rachel wasn't done yet. A week after that meeting, I started noticing things. Small, insignificant at first. A missed call from a random number. A car parked down the street that looked a little too familiar. A feeling, one I hadn't felt in a long time, that I was being watched. At first, I ignored it, chalked it up to paranoia. But then, I started getting messages from mutual friends. Hey man, I ran into Rachel the other day. She asked a lot about you. Dude, is everything okay? Rachel's been, I don't know, kinda obsessed lately. She keeps bringing you up, asking if you're seeing someone. And then, one night, I came home to find her sitting on my porch. She was curled up on the steps, hugging her knees, her face pale and tired. For a second, I considered turning around and driving somewhere, anywhere, just to avoid this. But I wasn't about to let her think she could just show up whenever she wanted. I parked the car, stepped out, and crossed my arms. Rachel, what are you doing here? She looked up, her eyes glassy. I didn't know where else to go. I sighed. That's not my problem. She winced, as if the words physically hurt her. I know I don't have any right to be here. But I don't know how to move forward. I clenched my jaw. Not my problem, I repeated, turning toward the door. She scrambled to her feet. Wait, please. I stopped but didn't turn around. I messed up, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I had something real, something solid, and I threw it away for nothing. I exhaled slowly. I'm not going to keep having this conversation with you, Rachel. She swallowed hard. Are you seeing someone? I let out a humorless laugh. That's none of your business. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to hold back tears. I can't stand the thought of you with someone else. I turned to face her fully. You don't get to say that. You don't get to care now. She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. I know, but it doesn't stop me from feeling it. I ran a hand through my hair. Rachel, what do you want from me? She hesitated. A second chance. I let out a slow breath, studying her. The woman in front of me wasn't the same Rachel I had married, and I wasn't the same man who had loved her. I can't give you that, I said, my voice firm. You made your choice. You wanted freedom. And now so do I. Tears slipped down her cheeks. So that's it. I nodded. That's it. She stared at me for a long moment before finally stepping back. I'm sorry, she whispered. I held her gaze. Me too. And then, she walked away, this time, for good. As I watched her disappear down the street, I felt something shift inside me. Closure. For the first time since this entire nightmare started, I knew I was truly free. After Rachel walked away that night, I stood on my porch for a long time, staring at the empty street, listening to the quiet hum of the world around me. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't waiting for something. I wasn't holding on to hope that she'd come back, or that things would somehow return to the way they used to be. It was over. Completely, truly over. And I was okay with that. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. Not in a dramatic, movie-like way, but in a quiet, undeniable sense of peace. It was strange how grief worked, how it wrapped itself around you like a fog, making you believe that nothing could exist beyond it. And then, one day, you step outside and realize the sun is still shining, the world is still turning, and you're still you. Maybe a different version, maybe a little bruised, but still here. And I wasn't just here. I was ready to start living again. I threw myself into my new life. Work became something I actually enjoyed instead of just a distraction. I started traveling. Nothing extravagant, just small road trips to places I'd always said I'd visit one day. I even adopted a dog, something Rachel and I had always talked about but never actually did. Turns out, having a loyal companion who's always excited to see you? Life-changing. I reconnected with people I had lost touch with over the years, friends who had been there for me, but whom I had unintentionally pushed away when my world fell apart. And somewhere along the way, I met someone new. Her name was Olivia. She wasn't like Rachel. She didn't make grand promises or try to sweep me off my feet with some whirlwind romance. She was steady, kind, and real. We met at a bookstore, of all places. She was struggling to reach a book on the top shelf, and I happened to be tall enough to help. One conversation turned into two, which turned into coffee, which turned into something that felt easy, natural. I didn't rush into anything. I wasn't looking for a rebound, and I wasn't trying to fill the void Rachel left behind. But as the months passed, I realized that Olivia wasn't just someone I liked spending time with, she was someone who made me want to be better. Someone who made me excited about the future, not just nostalgic for the past. One evening, as we sat on my porch, watching the sunset, she turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about her?" I knew who she meant. I took a deep breath, then shook my head. Not in the way I used to. She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. Good. And it was. Because the truth was, Rachel had been a chapter in my life. A long one, a painful one, but just a chapter. And now, I was writing a new one that wasn't defined by heartbreak or regret, but by growth, happiness, and the simple joy of moving forward. I had loved, I had lost, and I had come out the other side, stronger than I ever thought I could be. Rachel had chosen her freedom, and I had finally found mine.